Hey guys, how's it going? Duke of Italy, your favorite lo-fi music YouTuber and hiatus YouTuber. Holy crap, man. It's been a couple months at least. Sorry. So sorry for the absence. And as you can probably tell by this video, not doing genre January this year. I just decided to skip it because it was taking too long and I really wanted to get into the meat and potatoes this year and start dishing out some real content because I've got some concerts I'm coming to soon that I want to review and some charts I want to review and some stuff I've been working on. So here you are. Here's some reviews and here is a new series partially ushered by two different things. One, the fact that I finished the Caveman Riff chart last year, and that was the chart I worked out to, so I needed more music to work out to. So, of course, I moved on to more further death metal. The other thing being, I am going to Maryland Death Fest this year. I'm going to see the Saturday and Sunday night shows at the Power Plant, I believe, seeing such bands as Carpathian Forest, Abath, Cryptopsy, Gorguts, and I didn't know about any of these bands until I started looking at this chart. And that inspired me to review this chart for you guys today and for the next seemingly 11 parts. Yeah, this is a long chart. It's about 98 albums total, or 96 albums with like 2 EPs, if not maybe 4 EPs, but it's really long. And I've learned quite a bit about death metal in this time. And if you haven't put it together, this is the essential death metal chart. Some user on Mew made it. It is massive. I think it's maybe the biggest chart I've reviewed so far. I've been working on it for almost a year at this point. Heck, maybe a year. I mean, look back to when I finished the Caveman chart and go a little bit before the last video there, and that's probably when I started this thing. But it's about time, I've always been a big fan of black metal, and I wanted to get into heavier music, differentiate it between like deathcore and stuff like that, which I never liked deathcore, so I thought I'd get into actual death metal, and lo and behold, I'm having a whale of a time with the genre. That being said, just going into this, there are going to be a lot of divided parts between subgenres. In this episode, we're not even going to be talking about true death metal. We're going to be talking about a lot of extreme thrash metal, a lot of brutal thrash metal, a lot of stuff that was kind of like early 80s that kind of pushed towards a specific direction, stuff that no one quite knew what was going on. And then next episode, we're going to cover some death thrash and early death metal. So today it's just influences, but something I'm just going to say right here. I'm going to have some hot takes in this series. Their death metal, it has a lot of classics that are really heralded as absolutely untouchable stuff, and I hold no such. I don't really hold those beliefs that albums have to be perfect even if they're classic. There have always been a few albums I find to be duds out there, even if I can recognize why people love them so much. And of course, I don't have everything as a hot take. Like, for example, I've seen some people who don't like later era death, but Symbolic is one of the best death metal albums of all time, and I don't know why anyone would even confuse that. It is not overly technical. It's just as technical as it needs to be hyper melodic and kind of catchy, in all honesty. But it's not so catchy that it feels like it's breaking into alt rock territory or like gent, or it doesn't sound like Gojira. So I'm going to have some hot takes in this series. And of course, I'm going to compare a lot of things to black metal. Black metal is my baby. It's been my baby for a long time. But also, I love how historical this chart is. I might be mentioning some things that lend to the idea of the historical side of death metal growing with thrash metal. And in all honesty, it shows a really cool difference between Europe versus America versus Brazil in particular, and we're going to hear a bit about that today. And part of my sort of iconoclastic nature as a reviewer and being completely honest with this stuff, there are some things, some trends with this early period of extreme metal that I find to be borderline tragic. For example, I used to not really vibe with earlier Bathory, because I thought the mixing was rough. The drum sound, the gated reverb sound was just so loud that it was really annoying. I've since come around to that material and realized that was just something that distracted me at the time. But even then, there's some early black metal that I don't really love. Like there's some early Sodom that I don't really vibe that much with. But I think that's enough disclaimers for this video, and let's start getting into the actual extreme thrash metal, which we're actually going to start with Rigor Mortis's self-titled album. So you get some super, super clean thrash metal with some extremely fast drumming. And that's probably what lent to a lot of later death metal, is that you can basically hear blast beats on this thing. And the vocals are very reminiscent of Slayer, which, like, if you're not mimicking Slayer, I mean, you might want to check who's influencing you. Slayer's just the best. And there's a real hefty amount of bounce to this album. A lot of sort of swank beats, really bouncy riff style, which clearly influenced bands like Cannibal Corpse. There's also a pretty decent technical side to this whole thing. A lot of the riffs have a real flourish style of playing where they add a whole lot of extra notes that aren't really necessary for the melody of the song, but they add sort of an extra technical quality that is certainly entertaining. One problem I have, though, is actually the production wears a little bit thin. It actually feels maybe a bit too clean, which is probably the only time you'll hear me say that on this whole section of the chart. It feels just a little stale. It's kind of something that needs a bit of dirt, a little bit of cacophony, a little bit of reverb. Granted, it is mostly bangers, but there are some underwhelming sections as well, which is why I give this one a good. Then we go into the absolute classic, Pleasure to Kill by Creator, one of the founding Teutonic thrash metal bands that influenced so much death metal, so much black metal, that it's truly undeniable. And Creator's Pleasure to Kill is stupidly heavy for its time. You have some absurdly punchy bass in the mix here. It sounds like the mids were just cranked, probably some Motorhead influence, but what do I know? And you get some really fast black metal style tremolo riffs here, not quite like the melodic style that bands like Mayhem and Thorns would incorporate, but it's more like a little bit earlier. Just really fast and riffy, sort of that war metal style that we'd get from Canada, Sweden, Brazil. Just super fast, jumping around constantly. Probably influenced bands that would come to be known as like Norsecore, bands kind of like Marduk. It is stupid heavy and it's stupid fast, which is the entire appeal of this album. It's that it's really a landmark in heaviness for the time. Of course, other bands like Rigor Mortis have sort of a technical aspect or even a bouncy aspect, but here it's just the speed. Like, you wouldn't get like first wave death metal without this thing. And the vocals are so sick. They remind me a lot of other sort of proto black metal bands, a lot of the first wave stuff. Very cacophonous, a lot of reverb, really wretched and angry, kind of yelly, and a little bit amateurish. You know, there's a lot of character. And the riffs are really dope. This is super angry, super violent stuff. It's fight music, in all honesty. But yeah, it's sick, great album to work out to. And it's just great in general, and it's not even that long. Then we got an album absolutely heralded as a classic by many, Epidemic of Violence by Demolition Hammer. So other than the groovier parts here and some really heavy drum sounds, you get a lot of what Slayer was doing around this time. It is an album that probably sounds very influential, but in retrospect, it ends up sounding kind of redundant. So marking it as a historical piece of music is kind of tough. The lead guitar riffs are very, very strong here. They're probably the best part of the whole album. Makes songs like Pyroclastic Annihilation to be really extra heavy. But the problem here is that the rhythm guitar and the bass struggle. There's just not a lot of really good compounding riffs here. It's like kind of the opposite of what bands like Cryptopsy would end up doing, where the rhythm guitar has so much oomph behind it that the lead can just do whatever it wants. But here it's the lead holding the entire thing down, which kind of causes the whole thing to break under its own weight. That being said, of course, there are moments of greatness on this album. It's pretty influential. It's just not the cream of the crop in terms of early death metal and late extreme thrash metal. It's certainly good. I would claim it's a little bit overrated, but it's certainly good. And now we're reaching one of my personal favorite albums on this part, Morbid Saints' Spectrum of Death. Probably like one of the heaviest thrash metal albums of all time. You could probably put it above Rain and Blood by Slayer. Stupidly heavy, and the riffs are actually very catchy as well. This is an album that like not a lot of people can get into if you're only into thrash metal, if you're only into bands like Metallica. This band really separates the genres, and it's fast and it's groovy, which is kind of a really nice thing added in death metal, is sort of a groove factor. The drumming, just technicality wise, is incredible, but it sounds really heavy at the same time. The way it's mixed is really dense. And in terms of the guitar playing, dude, there's so many pinch harmonics on this thing, you'd think it's like early 2000s deathcore. Obviously that's a joke. There aren't any incessant breakdowns on this thing, but it sounds very, very heavy if I have not made myself clear. Scars and Assassin are both 7 minutes long, and they are certified bangers. Seriously, some of the best tracks on this whole album. It's also a perfectly produced album, which is insane for the time. The 80s having a perfectly produced extreme metal album is unheard of. This album is great. It's utterly fantastic. And what timing? Morbid Saint, not that long ago, released a new album. I think their only other album after like 30 years. I don't know why, but maybe it's okay. Who knows? And up next, we have Necrophagia's Season of the Dead. This is an album that really encapsulates a lot of the turning trends of the time. It's a lot of heavy metal stuff, a lot of traditional doom, and of course, like a giant, more than half of this is like thrash metal. The mixing is seriously a struggle. It's unclear. The guitar tone is seriously plain, and honestly, the vocals are a real struggle as well. The actual harsh vocals this guy's trying to do just don't cut it, as well as they're given way too much volume in the mix. It's pretty cacophonous and not in a way that death metal does well. And of course, there are some decent riffs in here, but you can't really hear any of them. It's just swallowed by the vocals and the drumming, just thickening up the mix, and it ends up sounding goofy. So I think this album's actually kind of poor, which it was a real struggle. I had a lot of hopes for this one. But it does kind of show a convergence of all these genres that went on to influence death metal in ways that were different, which I think is kind of cool. And up next, we have Slayer's Rain in Blood. What could I possibly even say about this album that hasn't been said already? It is one of the best thrash metal albums of all time. It's stupidly heavy. Tom Araya's voice is so commanding, and it's not like later death metal at all, really. But I've heard from many people mimicking it is impossible. He's just so out there and commanding. The lyrics are super brutal, as well as the riffs are crazy fast. Even some blast beats at certain portions in here. Don't expect grav blasts. They're not like stupidly fast, but you've also got some amazing tom fills. You've got some amazing parts that add some real catchiness. And of course, Rain in Blood broke out into the mainstream. It's in the mainstream. It is probably the first extreme metal album I ever heard. If you would call it extreme metal, I would call it extreme metal, a lot of people who are into like Metallica might not be able to get into Slayer as much. They just think Slayer is just a little too far. But come on, it's crazy. I could talk all day about Raining Blood and Angel of Death, which are fantastic. The drum parts alone make those sound amazing. Kerry King's lead riff style is so iconic, and his guitar solos will be imitated so often on this chart. It's crazy. How influential he is in particular in death metal is kind of crazy. And of course, there's some theory added when you get to bands like Cryptopsy. I'm going to reference Cryptopsy so much because I love them, but they actually have really technical styles in Cryptopsy that actually fits with the bizarre chord changes, which makes it more technical, yet it still feels brutal. Kerry King, of course, super noisy. Everyone knows him. Everyone loves him. Just enjoy this album. What's not to enjoy? Next on this chart, I won't actually really be discussing. It's Strappado by Slaughter, which I covered on the Caveman Riffs chart. I don't really have much reason to return to it. It kind of has some problems that some other albums on here were suffering from. It's okay. It just didn't feel brutal enough. A little too cacophonous, too poorly mixed. Historical footnote for sure, but it just kind of struggles to really get there for me. And next, a album that I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about, but Arise by Sepultura. Now, Sepultura could have had so many albums on this chart for the extreme thrash section, or even death thrash. You could probably kind of include this in death thrash. Sepultura is so awesome. They've really lasted through time, all the way through Roots. I think they maybe haven't had a bad album. I mean, maybe you could think like Morbid Visions is really poorly mixed, but the riffs are crazy. It's super influential. That early Brazilian stuff is like really insane. But I like how a few albums later, they get a little bit of a production upgrade as well as a riffs upgrade. Arise by Sepultura is a banger. And the thing is, when you expect really hard-hitting, extreme thrash metal, you could probably imagine something like Slayer that's super fast and no BS, nothing slow. But you see, Sepultura, they take some time with a little bit of melody in their riffs, some development, certainly a lot of repetition, but it has a surging quality to it that is so engaging, making this honestly fantastic lift music. Get a lift into this thing. And like all of the Brazilian extreme metal counterparts, this is very, very aggressive sounding. It's certainly some mosh music. And the guitar has so much body. The way it's EQ'd probably has a ton of bass on here, but not too much to sound muddy or distorted. It just sounds thick and heavy. And it certainly hits upon the melodic side at points. There's a song called Desperate Cry, which has an amazing lead guitar solo that is almost unheard of for this point in time. It's a really amazing, really unique album, and just another thing that sort of helps you separate this from its other albums at the time is that the drumming quality isn't just standard. It's not just swank beats and like slowed down stuff and even some breakdown points, but there are really subtle additions that break up the pacing here that actually make it much more engaging. It's stuff that you wouldn't really expect, but if you listen real closely, you get some extra syncopation, some points where it has extra snare hits. It's just stuff that a smart drummer knows how to do, and it makes it all that much better of a listen, which of course is much more enjoyable for someone like me. You know, the kind of guy who wants to enjoy his music. But that being said, that is all the extreme thrash metal I have time for today. And next time we will get into some early death metal, which I'm very excited for, to actually get into some really heavy stuff. That being said, I hope you guys enjoyed. And one final thing, this thumbnail, the Smiling Friends adaptation of Scream Bloody Gore, was done by Jen, my good friend Jen, who's done thumbnails for me before. And also being said, I mean, we haven't confirmed this entirely, but we are in the midst of making more thumbnails. After this video, once I review something that isn't death metal and then go back to death metal and just keep doing that for the entire summer until Nothing But Black Metal in November, Jen's going to be making more thumbnails for me, not just for death metal, but for other genres as well that I will be reviewing. So stay tuned for Jen's amazing art. Jen is a fantastic artist. All that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys enjoyed the music I talked about. Some of it more than I do, and some of it you just can't enjoy it more than I do because I just loved it so much. Comments, questions, concerns down below. Would love to hear what you guys have to say. I would appreciate it, like and subscribe. My Discord is in the description down below. I'd love to have you guys there to talk more about death metal or black metal or Blade, because that's what I normally talk about there. And social media in the description if you want to see what I'm actually up to. And that's about it. Hope you guys are doing well out there. Have a good day. Bye.